we are the ones that are brave enough to put our hands up and say, right, the line, it stops here. We're going to do something different now, and then our future generations are going to benefit from it. So, I often applaud all the families I work with and say, this is hard work, what you're doing, changing this story, but you are doing an incredible service to your family coming forward.
We're healing mother wounds. Yeah.
Massive.
Hi everyone, and welcome to No Place Like Home. I'm one of your hosts, Jess. We've also got Larissa with us, and we have the beautiful Lael Stone back with us again to talk a little bit more about some of the things we touched on last time. Thank you, Lael, for joining us.
My pleasure.
So in our last episode, we touched on birth trauma, and, it's a big topic at the moment in the news and on Instagram and in our communities anyway. And you shared with us a little bit about what it means to have birth trauma. Can you share with us why it's so important to be able to discuss your trauma with someone who knows how to hold space for you? Someone who can, help you process your story.
I think it's interesting, isn't it, that birth trauma, and when we look at the stats, is 1 in 3 women have birth trauma. And I actually think I do believe it's higher than that.
Absolutely.
That's only the women that talk about it. Now, for any other event that we have in our life as humans that is trauma, it's, if you went to war, if you witnessed someone being killed, if you had in extreme violence or abuse, it would be seen as negligent to not go and get some help around your trauma. Yet with birth, we don't hold the same space for that. Often we're just like, well, your baby's healthy and you're fine, so off you go.
Yeah.
If we can't, if we're physically okay, then it's all right. We'll just move on. And yet birth is one of the greatest initiations that we do as women. It challenges us physically, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically. It's huge. I mean, and that's even if you choose to have an elective cesarean, perhaps it's really controlled, or whether your birth is fast or not, it doesn't matter. The act of carrying a baby, birthing a baby from your body, and then that postnatal phase is a huge thing in becoming a mother, and it's a huge thing, as a human. And I think that for a long time we haven't really looked at birth trauma as something that's worth speaking about, because I think people are highly uncomfortable and challenged by it. And really the narrative has been, it's okay, just get over it. And so I think it's so vital and important that every woman who has a baby has the opportunity to debrief their birth. But I also think it's really important that they're able to do it with someone who has a sound knowledge and understanding of birth, who understands trauma as a whole. And I think, psychologists are amazing and counsellors are amazing, but birth sits in its own little field, because I think if you don't understand how the system works, don't understand all the different dynamics that can be out at play in birth, then we're just kind of addressing this one thing, which was maybe your experience wasn't great or whatever. So I do believe that there needs to be a whole specialised field for birth trauma, which is really where every woman has the opportunity to debrief at birth. Now, I know that there are some hospitals or care providers that are trying to do that. They're offering birth debriefing, or come in at 6 weeks and we'll unpack your birth. But in the women that I've spoken to and what I've heard is often it's quite clinical. You might go through your notes, but it actually doesn't get to the deeper emotional part of how they felt, what it looked like for them. And it's very interesting too. A woman's take on her birth, in the first 48 hours after giving birth, the first 2 weeks of giving birth, 6 weeks, 6 months, 2 years later, they're often very, very different experiences of how she recalls the birth and how she feels about it. And so just a one-off 6-week check-in, and how do you feel about your birth, and we could tell you about your notes, and is not enough, because like as we talked about in our other podcast, is that often birth trauma sits upon other trauma that we have that perhaps has often been hidden or uncovered. And then when we go through this really powerful experience with giving birth, then often it can open up a bit of a Pandora's box.
Yeah, it certainly is a Pandora's box.
Oh, yeah. So you have developed a course to help practitioners help other people, or to teach practitioners how to help people debrief their births.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit? I know it's still really new,
No,
and
it's
I'm really sad I didn't know about it, and I can't believe I missed it. And I know that you have a wait list from here.
And there's more to come. There's more to come, that's for sure. We've called it, so I'm doing it with a partner of mine, Bernadette Lack.
Who we all love.
Yeah, from Cora and Flora Store. She does, her best weird Instagram posts.
Oh, man. I talk about her every time I'm at the gym.
I'm just like, it's awesome. And, Bernadette's a midwife and she works a lot, with postnatal care, with the body, stuff like that. And we'd done some stuff together really around just supporting mothers. And, she does a lot of birth debriefing. I did it for a really, really long time. But, my work is a lot in trauma these days. And we were both just saying there needs to be more people out there doing it. And there was no course out there for people to learn how to do birth debriefing. So, I think, again, we can go to psychologists or counsellors, but there really needs to be a specific understanding and set of knowledge when we are sitting with women and they're unpacking their births. So we designed a course that really is taking practitioners through the deep layers of what can turn up in birth. So not just the statistics that we see, not just what happens in our system, but about the bigger stories of trauma that can happen, how our childhood impacts often how we end up birthing, the dynamics between partnerships and what that looks like. We go deep into our own judgments and stories, because if you're sitting there and you have a really strong perspective on how you think birth should be and a woman's telling you her story, then sometimes that's going to skew your judgment. And we really get our practitioners to go through their own work and own stories in order to be in a place where they can hold a very compassionate, gentle space to understand people's stories and then be able to support them with either the tools they need to process it or to give them other steps forward to be able to move on with birth. Because birth debriefing is not about just sitting there talking about your story. One part of us when we're dealing with trauma is our mind needs to understand what happens, and that's where talking about the story is really important. So we often need to talk about the story, understand why it happened. Often we want a timeline to understand what happened when. So our mind often needs to understand the story, but our body is actually the thing that we need to work with, because it's the body that often holds the trauma.
Yeah.
And so we work a lot with how do we help people access that within their body and help them gently move it, and the different modalities that are out there to really support that as well. So I think when we look at birth trauma, we have to hold both places of the mind and the body, and we can do some really powerful stuff when we support both.
Does your course cover, and I don't know, maybe we don't want to answer this because I don't want you to have to give too much away, but does your course also cover how the people who are holding the space for people to share their stories, how we can be protecting ourselves?
Yeah, for sure. We do a whole lot around not carrying other people's stories, not looking after our own energy fields within those spaces, when to refer on, when to be really aware that maybe this is too big. We do a big component of listening partnerships in our training so that we match people up. They have to talk and debrief around anything that they do. They've got to come together and share their feelings and stories, because you really have to be supported. You're doing some heavy work here, listening to some big stories around stuff. And at the end of the day, look, we've said this to a lot of our practitioners, that it's not so much about having all the knowledge of the stats or the system or what happened. It's actually about just holding a really compassionate space, which is sitting with a woman and saying, and really deeply listening to her story. And sometimes it's as simple as saying, I am so sorry that happened to you. And you have every right to feel deeply upset and hurt by what's happened. Sometimes that is the healing of just being acknowledged in the story.
And not necessarily having the answer or a solution.
Yeah. And the job is not to have the answer. The job is to listen and to hold that safe space for us to be heard, because that is our fundamental desire as humans, is to be deeply heard. And so especially in that birth space, being able to be heard, perhaps there are questions around what happened that can give them that information, that can soothe that part of their mind that wants to know. But it really is, I think, giving women space to know that what they went through was not okay, and we're really sorry for what happened, and that you have every right to feel how you feel.
Did your own birth experiences inform a lot of how you wrote the program and how you sort of orchestrated the course?
I think, yes, mine probably, and Bernadette's as well, and also all the hundreds and hundreds of stories that we've heard.
Yeah.
And I think it's also, I've done a lot of work in that trauma space, understanding how trauma gets locked in the body, what we then do. It's helping them understand how that looks as well, and then how we help work with trauma, the impact and the power of tears and releasing feelings, how powerful that can be. So it's pretty in depth. Like it's funny, some of our practitioners who are doing the course said, I thought I was just going to come along and just get a checklist of questions to ask, and they're like, oh, this is so much bigger than this. And I'm like, you have to do the work to be able to sit there with the work. And I'm like, you're only going to take someone as far as you're willing to go yourself. So everything that we are teaching them to do with people, we're making them do, to learn it themselves, to unpack their own stories. Yeah, there's a lot of crying. People are like, I didn't realize we're going to cry so much. And I'm like, it's amazing, because they're actually learning a lot about themselves, and they're also being able to sit in this space of deep compassion for the work.
Yeah.
What was your experience like unpacking your own trauma? Like, what did you do? Because back then there wouldn't have been, these amazing space holders that are around now.
Yeah. Well, for me, with my first, I did nothing, and I just sat on it for years, which wasn't any good. And then I did come across one woman who listened to my story and made suggestions for the second one. And the second birth, I didn't feel like I needed to debrief, because I just felt so ecstatic and just, it was really healing. But the third birth, because it was a huge experience, I had to do a lot of work. And I did a lot of counselling. I did a lot of body work. I had to do a lot of my own self-process. And that third birth experience actually just unlocked a whole lot of stuff that was about not having boundaries, about not taking care of my needs. Like, even in the postpartum space with all three of my kids, particularly the first two, there was not really much postpartum care. Like, I didn't know about resting in bed for weeks and being fed nutritious foods. I remember after I had my son, I know I couldn't sit down for a few weeks because I had an episiotomy, but I was kind of back working in my business like 10 days later.
As a children's entertainer.
Oh, I wasn't actually performing, but I was still in the office doing stuff. Yeah.
Even so, wow.
Yeah. So, and there wasn't that rest and care, and even in the second one I felt great. So I just kind of kept going. And I've realised now, many, many years later, I think I had that postnatal depletion for a really long time. I've had low iron for a long time. Like that exhaustion and tiredness, I absolutely believe came from my births and not having that time to rest and rebuild my body. And I like breastfed all my kids, for 2 years. Like I was doing everything because you think you can. And then wondering why I was so exhausted all the time.
I had that too. I don't think, and I just put that down to, I'm a mum now, I'm just supposed to always be tired. And it wasn't until my mum actually said to me, I don't think this is normal. You need to. And that's when I took myself off to an integrated doctor and was like, I'm tired, I'm this, and did all the tests. And he's like, how are you even getting up out of bed? You've got no cortisol, your adrenals are gone, you've got no, and I was like, really?
I remember a doctor saying to me once, because it's similar, I went and had all these tests done, and she's like, you're meant to feel vital. And I go, what? I don't think I've ever felt vital.
What is that?
Maybe when I was like 22.
Yeah.
And I'm like, not since having children have I ever felt vital. And I realised that there was such deep depletion there and not being careful. And again, I didn't know the importance of the village or rest or taking care of
It was
myself.
a very unique time, I think, when you had your children, because we've so far gone from the village, but I feel like now, at least for people who are having children now, we've got, even if we don't have the village, we've got resources.
Yes.
There's more education.
Yes.
Whereas when you had your babies, it was kind of this.
You just get on with it.
Yeah.
And I think the narrative was really strong, which is, if you want to be seen as a good mother, then you just get on and do it all. You should be shopping
And
at
don't
Chadstone
complain.
with your baby 2 weeks later.
Yeah.
And just get on with it. And so that was, I think, drummed into us of like, you just get up and you just keep going. And it really wasn't until years later, after having kids and realising the level of exhaustion and actually going through that trauma with my third baby, that I realised I had no self-care and I had no boundaries. And that experience really made me see, no, I have to change this. And I think one of the greatest gifts of that is, I have 2 daughters, and I was like, I do not want them to think that this is what it looks like. And I want them to have a really powerful experience. I want them to have a really powerful relationship with themselves of care. So they're only going to get that if they see me doing it. And that's actually when I began to change, so that they actually could see what it was modeled to them around deep care and reverence for myself and my body and boundaries. And I love it now at 20 and 15. They are fierce about their care. Like, they have no qualms about like, nah, I'm resting. I need this. And I'm like, yes. And I can guarantee by the time they have babies, I am like, right. Stay there, skin on skin, love on that baby, and I'm just going to love on you. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. Which brings us to your newest program that you've got, Motheration, which looks like a beautiful, beautiful program. Do you want to talk to us more about that?
So Bernadette and I created our first program, Holding the Mother, which is really for the first 6 months postpartum, which is a beautiful combination of body work stuff. So Bernadette does all the work on how to move your body in the postpartum phase, how to reconnect with your body, lots of stuff around pelvic floor, gentle movement, all that kind of stuff. So it's a beautiful guide for any mum who's had a baby around really connecting in and supporting their body. And then I do a whole lot of stuff in the program about that whole initiation into motherhood, our feelings, the stories we have around guilt, boundaries, setting limits, asking for what we need, support. I mean, I think it's everything that I wished I had known when I was a first mum, and someone giving you the permission to say, hey, you can actually ask for this and this is what it's about. We also talk about birth trauma in there and really about integrating what it is to be a mum and how tricky it can be. And there's lots of beautiful relaxations in it as well to rest and nurture. So it's like that beautiful kind of warm hug for the first 6 months. And then we have another program we're just about to launch called Centering the Mother, which is really for anyone that's a mother that again has got beautiful exercise stuff in it around just nourishing, and it's very much for centering the mother is about connecting into your body, because I think as mothers we are all about servitude and giving, and we forget about us. And so we go into some of the deeper stuff in that program around relationships, asking for what we need, our relationship to sexuality and how we feel about our bodies. We talk a lot again about boundaries and our strong yeses and nos, and all the places that I see turn up for women around often losing their identity and coming back to that powerful version of themselves. So yeah, that's a big kind of juicy program as well. For me, I often think that those programs are like, let's just cut the shit and actually get very real about where we are today and what's going on and what you need to be the best mother you can be, right? Which is about claiming those spaces and those boundaries and loving on yourself and being that for your children.
Yeah, for me, it's, there are all of these programs and they're amazing. And for me, we talked about this with you, Fern, didn't we, Jess, about how do we flip that narrative of, yes, the pregnancy is important, yes, the birth is important, but there's also this really other fundamental piece that actually affects us as the birthing person for the rest of our lives. And I think this is what we're really trying to flip the lid on to say, how do we get this at the expecting mums? Yes. How do we have this become a conversation while we've got these beautiful pregnant women?
Yeah, and it's so hard because, we all know there's so much. We've spoken about this. There's so much that you have to take in as a expecting mother. But again, the commodification of motherhood, the nursery, the pram, the everything. We're just so distracted by that to add on another thing and say, do all that, but then also do this course or read this book or hire this doula or spend this money.
I think we just got to keep modelling it.
Yeah.
Because I look at it and go, my daughters will do it so differently to how I done it, because they will have seen, they're exposed to the information early. I mean, I taught sex ed in schools for like 5 years, right? And so I would always do a component on birth. So I would talk about birth and hormones and how extraordinary it could be. I was like, that's where we need to start imprinting these kids when they're 15 around birth is not what we think Hollywood shows us. Birth is actually a really powerful experience, can be be deeply intimate. Your bodies are amazing. And even talking to them about menstruation and how your bodies work and hormones and being connected and all that stuff. I tell you, they loved it. I made a point of teaching pleasure-based sex education. So it was really about, this is how we get the best out of our bodies, right?
Yeah.
And this is what we're meant to feel. This is how amazing it can be. And I think when we start talking about it with our, teens, and then they see it modelled as they move into adulthood, then I do believe the narrative's going to change.
Yeah.
That they go, this is actually what serves us as humans. But we need things like what you're doing and your book and all those things to keep putting that information out there so that it does become the narrative.
And it's also just about getting people to reprioritize how they spend their money. People don't bat an eyelid at spending 50 to 100K on a wedding. It's kind of expected that that's how much a wedding will cost.
Yeah.
But if you spend 50K on your postpartum, you're insane.
Yeah.
But your postpartum loss lasts a lot longer than your wedding, and it's just that.
Yeah.
Culturally, we are just, our priorities are wrong.
Yeah, they are.
It's going to take
totally.
a long time.
I do think it is. I think if we can model to our children, then that next generation will start to see it in a different way. And I think that's how we do create the change. And also too, I think about this in a lot of the emotional work I do with parents and families, how we respond to our children now in our homes with kindness and compassion, listening to their feelings. All of that is setting up a story within them that actually is going to want to mean that they take care of themselves because they've got a deeper connection to themselves. They're connected to that empathy and that compassion, and then they're more likely to actually continue that on as they move into those next phases of their lives. So I have hope.
Yeah, I have hope.
Yeah.
I've said in an earlier podcast that I hope that by the time our kids have kids, it won't be, do you have a meal train?
Yeah.
It's who's making your meal train for you.
Yes, beautiful.
Where do I sign
just
up?
sort of
just that.
Yeah.
I hope that it's just an expected thing that you would have a meal train when you have a baby. And that is the bare minimum of care right there. But
Totally.
It's so
It's a start.
simple and it's a start. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's even flipping the lid, talking about you doing sex education with the teenagers, Lael. It's even, I look at Valentina, she's going to be 11 next year, and she's coming up to that time where she's going to start getting her period.
Cusp of adolescence.
Yeah, but, even understanding how I've got a beautiful girlfriend, Divya, who she's Indian, and she talks about how that is the becoming, right? That is the first becoming when, a girl starts to menstruate, and how it's a celebration and it's a whole thing, right? Whereas here, there's actually quite this negative.
There's so much
sort of
shame and taboo
you're
around
gonna have
it.
this and this and this.
Yeah.
And so we have said, this is going to be a celebration in the house and it's nothing to fear and it's a beautiful part of, and it speaks to that. How do we flip the narrative as well with postpartum? And I think it's a very similar.
Yeah. Well, I think as women, we have been taught to be so disconnected from ourselves and our bodies.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, birth sometimes what it does is it sends us into a space where we then are forced to look at that and forced to look at our connection to ourselves, to our intuition, to our yeses and nos, and the same in that postpartum phase. And so I think if we can do it earlier and by modelling it, but also giving our children these beautiful opportunities for these rites of passage to understand what it is, then we are going to set up a different story. Like I watched both my daughters who have a completely different relationship to their bodies around menstruating, around sex, all that stuff, like amazing, so amazing how they honour that within them. And I think it's possible and it can happen. I often think that when we are being brave enough to make these changes, whether it's within relationships, whether it's connected to ourselves, whether it's how we parent our children, we are the ones that are brave enough to put our hands up and say, right, the line, it stops here. We're going to do something different now, and then our future generations are going to benefit from it. So, I often applaud all the families I work with and say, this is hard work, what you're doing, changing this story, but you are doing an incredible service to your family coming forward.
We're healing mother wounds. Yeah.
Massive.
Thank you so much, Lael. It's been such a pleasure to meet you in the flesh, obviously. You know, we've spoken quite a bit. We share the same amazing reflexologist.
Oh, yeah, God, she's a gem. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
she's just amazing.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we've had many conversations over the years, but it was beautiful to see you in person today. So I thank you again. I'm very grateful.
For having me.
This podcast represents the opinions of our hosts and their guest speakers. Views and opinions expressed in the podcast are our own and do not represent that of our places of work. This podcast is for informational purposes only, and content here should not be taken as medical or professional advice. Please consult your healthcare professional for any personal recommendations and medical care. While we make every effort to ensure that the information we are sharing is accurate based on the best available information at the time of recording, we welcome any comments, suggestions or feedback via our website contact form, home.com.au/contact. Names and details of personal experiences may have been changed to allow for anonymity and privacy. To join the conversation, join us on social media at Home Postpartum.